The Tipping Point: How Little Things Can Make a Big Difference, by Malcolm Gladwell. Introduction. Imagine for a moment, it's the mid-1990s. There's a brand of shoes called Hush Puppies. Maybe you've heard of them: classic, comfortable, brushed suede shoes. But back then, they were all but dead. Sales had dropped to a mere 30,000 pairs a year. The company that made them, Wolverine, was seriously thinking about phasing them out for good. It was a brand for small-town family stores, a relic of a bygone era. And then, something strange happened. A few executives from the company were at a fashion shoot when a stylist from New York told them that Hush Puppies were suddenly hip. Not in the malls, not in the suburbs, but in the clubs and bars of downtown Manhattan. Resale shops in Soho and the East Village were selling them. Kids were hunting down the last remaining pairs in dusty old stores and buying them up. The executives were baffled. This made no sense. Isaac Mizrahi, one of the hottest designers at the time, was supposedly wearing them himself. Within a year, other designers were calling, wanting to feature the shoes in their runway shows. An actor, Pee Wee Herman, walked into a new Hush Puppies boutique while the shelves were still being put up and bought a couple of pairs. In 1995, the company sold 430,000 pairs. The next year, they sold 4 times that. And the year after, even more. A brand that was on the verge of extinction suddenly exploded. It all started with a handful of kids in a few city blocks. How does that happen? How does an idea, a product, or a behavior suddenly catch fire and spread like an epidemic? And on the flip side, how does a massive problem, like the crime wave that crippled New York City in the 1980s, suddenly vanish, dropping by 2/3 in just 5 years? These are the mysteries that obsessed a brilliant young writer for The New Yorker named Malcolm Gladwell. In the year 2000, he published a book that would change the way we think about the world. The Tipping Point became an international phenomenon, a book that didn't just sell millions of copies, but gave us a new language for understanding how change happens. And today, we're going to unlock its secrets. I want to share with you the profound and surprisingly simple rules that govern our world. By the end of our time together, you won't just see how trends are born, you'll understand the hidden forces that shape your own life, and how you, with the right insight, can start positive epidemics of your own. This isn't just about shoes or crime rates. This is about the very nature of how our world works. So, let's begin. Book summary. Have you ever stopped to think about how ideas actually spread? Not the big, obvious marketing campaigns, but the real, person-to-person currents that shape what we buy, what we believe, and how we act. Gladwell's big idea is simple but revolutionary. He says we should think about social change the same way we think about viruses. Ideas, products, messages, and behaviors, he tells us, spread just like epidemics. They start small, they simmer for a while, and then, in one dramatic moment, they reach what he calls the tipping point. That's the moment when everything changes all at once. The story of Hush Puppies is a perfect example. So is the sudden drop in New York City's crime rate. They might seem unrelated, but Gladwell says they share 3 common traits, 3 rules of epidemics. If you understand these 3 rules, you understand the secret to creating change. They are the law of the few, the stickiness factor, and the power of context. Let's explore them, one by one. First, the law of the few. This is the idea that in any social epidemic, a tiny percentage of people do the majority of the work. Economists have a rule they call the 80-20 principle, that 80% of the work is often done by 20% of the participants. In most societies, 20% of criminals commit 80% of the crime. 20% of beer drinkers drink 80% of the beer. But Gladwell says that when it comes to ideas spreading, it's even more extreme. A very small number of special people are responsible for starting and spreading these social epidemics. He gives us one of the most powerful stories in American history to prove his point, the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. We all know the legend. On the night of April 18, 1775, Paul Revere rode through the Massachusetts countryside to warn the colonists that the British were coming. He knocked on doors, alerted local leaders, and set off a chain reaction of church bells and drumbeats that spread like a virus. By morning, the entire region was mobilized, ready to fight. It's the most famous example of a word-of-mouth epidemic. But here's the part of the story we don't often hear. On that very same night, another man, a tanner named William Dawes, set out with the exact same message. He rode just as far, through just as many towns. But his ride was a failure. The towns he passed through didn't wake up. The local militias weren't alerted. In fact, so few men from one of the towns Dawes rode through fought the next day that historians thought it must have been a pro-British town. It wasn't. They just never got the message. So what was the difference? The message was the same. The urgency was the same. The difference, Gladwell argues, was the messenger. Paul Revere was a very special kind of person. He was what Gladwell calls a connector. Connectors are the people in our world who seem to know everyone. They are the social glue of our society. They have a special gift for bringing the world together. Think about your own circle of friends. If you traced back how you met each person, you'd probably find that a few key people are responsible for introducing you to almost everyone you know. They are the hubs in our social network. Paul Revere was the ultimate connector of his time. He was intensely social, a member of countless clubs and committees. When Boston needed its first streetlights, Revere was on the committee. When the city market needed regulation, Revere was the clerk. He was a fisherman, a card player, a theater lover. He knew everyone, from the dock workers to the political elites. So when he rode through the countryside that night, he didn't just shout into the darkness. He knew exactly whose door to knock on. He knew the local leaders, the militia captains, the key players in every town. And they knew him. They trusted him. William Dawes, on the other hand, was just an ordinary man. A fine patriot, surely, but once he left his hometown, he was a stranger. He didn't have the vast social network to spread the word effectively. Gladwell says that these connectors are one of three types of people who make up the law of the few. The other two are mavens and salesmen. Mavens are the information specialists. The word comes from Yiddish, and it means one who accumulates knowledge. These are the people we rely on to connect us with new information. They are the ones who read the consumer reports, who know the best deal on a car, who can tell you which new restaurant is worth trying. But a maven isn't just an expert. A maven is a teacher, a helper. They have a passion for sharing what they know, not to show off, but because they genuinely want to help you. Gladwell introduces us to a man named Mark Alpert, a professor who is the quintessential maven. Alpert can tell you the best price for coffee 10 years ago, the exact way to get a discount hotel room in New York, and the pros and cons of every car on the market. His motivation isn't selfish, it's a deep-seated desire to solve other people's problems. When a maven gives you a recommendation, you listen. Why? Because their advice is disinterested. They're not trying to sell you something. They're trying to help you. Paul Revere was also a maven. He wasn't just a social butterfly, he was part of a secret group that gathered intelligence on the British. He knew what was happening, and he knew who to tell. The third type of person is the salesman. These are the persuaders, the people with the charisma and charm to make you believe what they're saying. They have an uncanny ability to draw you into their own rhythms, to build an instant bond of trust and rapport. Gladwell introduces us to Tom Gow, a financial planner who is so mesmerizing he could sell anything to anyone. But what makes someone like Gao so persuasive? It's not just the logic of his arguments. It's the little things, the non-verbal cues. Gladwell points to fascinating psychological studies. In one, viewers who watched ABC News anchor Peter Jennings were more likely to vote for Ronald Reagan, because Jennings, perhaps unconsciously, smiled more when he talked about Reagan. The smile was a subtle, persuasive signal. In another study, students who were told to nod their heads up and down while listening to a radio editorial found it far more persuasive than students who were told to shake their heads from side to side. Great salesmen are masters of these subtle cues. They are emotionally contagious. When they are happy, they make you happy. Their enthusiasm is infectious. They draw you into a kind of dance, a synchrony of conversation and movement that makes you want to agree with them. So, the law of the few tells us that for an idea to tip, it needs to be spread by these special people. Connectors spread the message, Mavens provide the message, and salesmen persuade us that the message is worth listening to. Those downtown kids who started the hush puppies trend, they were the innovators. But the trend didn't explode until it was picked up by connectors, who spread it to different social circles, Mavens, who recognized it as something cool and authentic, and salesmen who made it appealing to the masses. These people are the translators, taking an idea from a small, niche world and making it understandable and attractive to the rest of us. But the right messenger is only part of the equation. The message itself has to be special. This brings us to Gladwell's second rule, the stickiness factor. Stickiness is the quality that makes a message memorable. It's what makes it stick in your mind. We're bombarded with thousands of messages every day. Most of them go in one ear and out the other. But a sticky message is one you can't forget. Winston tastes good like a cigarette should. That slogan, with its slightly ungrammatical use of like, was so unusual in the 1950s that people talked about it. It created a sensation. It was sticky. Where's the beef? From the old Wendy's commercials? That was sticky. Gladwell argues that we often think making something memorable requires shouting, repetition, and a huge budget. But often, the secret to stickiness is a small, simple, but clever twist. The greatest example of this is the story of Sesame Street. In the late 1960s, a television producer named Joan Gans Cooney had an audacious idea. She wanted to use the power of television to start a literacy epidemic among preschoolers, especially those from disadvantaged homes. At the time, this was a radical notion. Television was considered a low-involvement medium, a talking box that entertained but didn't educate. Good teaching was interactive and personal. How could a TV show ever be an effective teacher? The creators of Sesame Street took on this challenge with an almost scientific rigor. Their breakthrough insight was this: if you can hold the attention of children, you can educate them. And they realized that children don't watch TV like zombies, just staring at the bright lights and funny noises. They watch when they understand, and they look away when they are confused. So, the producers hired a psychologist named Ed Palmer to figure out what was holding kids' attention. Palmer invented a brilliant tool he called the distractor. He would bring a group of preschoolers into a room and show them an episode of Sesame Street on a TV monitor. But right next to the TV, he'd project a slideshow of interesting pictures, changing the slide every 7.5 seconds. By tracking when the kids were watching the show versus when they were looking at the slides, Palmer could create a second-by-second map of what was sticky and what wasn't. What he discovered was revolutionary. He found that kids didn't like long segments. 3 to 4 minutes was optimal. They didn't like it when adults on the show had contentious arguments. The confusion made them tune out. They thought kids would love watching live animals, but the distractor showed that animal segments were a bomb every time. But Palmer's most important discovery came just before the show went on the air. The original plan was to keep the fantasy elements, the Muppets, separate from the real scenes on the street with the human actors. Child psychologists had insisted that mixing fantasy and reality would confuse children. But when Palmer tested the pilot episodes, he found that the kids were riveted by the Muppets, but as soon as the show switched to the street scenes with just adults, their attention plummeted. The street was supposed to be the glue holding the show together, but it was boring the kids to tears. With just weeks to go before the air date, the producers made a desperate decision. They defied the experts and decided to mix fantasy and reality. They created new Muppets like Big Bird and Oscar the Grouch who could walk and talk with the human cast on the street. And in that one change, they found the magic formula. The artful blend of fluffy monsters and earnest adults became the essence of Sesame Street, a desperate attempt to make the show sticky. But the story doesn't end there. Years later, a new children's show came along called Blue's Clues, and it became even stickier than Sesame Street. How? By taking the lessons of stickiness to an even deeper level. The creators of Blue's Clues realized that preschoolers think in narratives. They organize their world through stories. So, instead of Sesame Street's fast-paced, magazine-style format with dozens of short, unconnected segments, each episode of Blue's Clues is a single half-hour story. The host, Steve, presents a puzzle, and the audience helps him find clues to solve it. The show is also incredibly literal. There are no clever puns or adult jokes that might confuse a 4-year-old. A character that's a mailbox is named Mailbox. A shovel and a pail are called Shovel and Pail. It might seem boring to an adult, but to a child, it's perfectly clear and understandable. And Blue's Clues embraced another key to stickiness: repetition. The creators noticed what they called the James Earl Jones effect. On Sesame Street, there was a segment where the actor James Earl Jones would recite the alphabet, with long pauses between each letter. The first time kids watched it, they would shout out the letter after Jones. After a few viewings, they would shout it out before him, in the pause. With enough repetition, they would anticipate the letter even before it appeared on screen. For a child, repetition isn't boring, it's empowering. Each time they watch, they understand it on a deeper level, predicting what will happen and feeling a sense of mastery. So, Blue's Clues did something no TV show had ever done. They ran the same episode 5 days in a row, Monday through Friday. And the research showed that kids' attention and comprehension actually increased over the week. The lessons from Sesame Street and Blue's Clues are profound. Stickiness isn't about being loud or flashy. It's about understanding your audience and making small, critical adjustments to the structure and presentation of your message to make it memorable and irresistible. This brings us to Gladwell's third and final rule: the power of context. This is the idea that human beings are exquisitely sensitive to their environment. Our behavior is not just a product of our character, it's a function of the situation we're in. Minor changes in our immediate surroundings can have a massive impact on how we act. The most powerful illustration of this is the story of New York City's crime epidemic. As I mentioned, in the 1980s, the city was a mess. The subways, in particular, were chaotic. Every car was covered in graffiti, top to bottom. Fare beating was rampant. The system was filthy, unreliable, and dangerous. Bernhard Goetz, the subway vigilante who shot 4 young men who tried to mug him in 1984, became a hero to many because he seemed to be a response to this overwhelming sense of disorder. Then, in the early 1990s, the crime rate tipped. It didn't just decline, it plummeted. How? The common explanations? A better economy, the end of the crack epidemic, an aging population? Don't fully explain the speed and scale of the drop in New York. Gladwell argues that the answer lies in a theory called broken windows. The theory, developed by criminologists James Q. Wilson and George Kelling, says that crime is the inevitable result of disorder. If a window in a building is broken and left unrepaired, people will conclude that no one cares and no one is in charge. Soon, more windows will be broken, and a sense of anarchy will spread, sending a signal that anything goes. Graffiti, public disorder, and aggressive panhandling are all the equivalent of broken windows. They are invitations to more serious crime. In the mid-1980s, the New York Transit Authority, on Kelling's advice, decided to put this theory into practice. The new subway director, David Gunn, did something that seemed crazy at the time. With the system on the verge of collapse, he decided to focus on graffiti. He saw it as symbolic of the system's decay. He started a relentless campaign to clean every single subway car. Once a car was cleaned, it was never allowed to be vandalized again. Cleaning crews would wait for graffiti artists to finish their elaborate, 3-day murals, and then, right in front of them, they would paint over it with rollers. The message was clear: your work will never see the light of day. By 1990, the graffiti was gone. Then, a new police chief, William Bratton, took over the transit police. He, too, was a believer in broken windows. With felonies at an all-time high, what did he focus on? Fare beating. He believed that the 170,000 people a day who were jumping turnstiles were sending the same signal of disorder as the graffiti. He put plainclothes officers at the turnstiles and started arresting fare beaters by the dozen. And they discovered something interesting. 1 in 7 of those arrested had an outstanding warrant for a more serious crime, and 1 in 20 was carrying a weapon. By cracking down on the little things, they started to impact the big things. When Rudolph Giuliani became mayor, he made Bratton the head of the NYPD, and they applied the same strategy to the entire city, cracking down on quality-of-life crimes like public urination and the squeegee men who harassed drivers. And the crime rate fell off a cliff. The power of context says that the behavior of Getz and the 4 youths on that subway wasn't just about their personal pathologies. It was about the message being sent by the graffiti-covered car, the filthy platform, and the general disorder of the system. Change the context, and you change the behavior. This idea is so powerful because it challenges our most fundamental beliefs about human nature. We tend to believe that character is destiny. We make what psychologists call the fundamental attribution error. We overestimate the importance of character and underestimate the importance of the situation. Gladwell points to the famous Stanford prison experiment, where normal, healthy college students assigned to be guards in a mock prison quickly became cruel and sadistic. Their environment overwhelmed their inherent personalities. He also tells the story of the Good Samaritan experiment, where Princeton seminary students were asked to walk across campus to give a talk. Along the way, they passed a man slumped in an alley, clearly in distress. Who stopped to help? It had nothing to do with their religious convictions. It didn't even matter that half of them were on their way to give a talk on the parable of the Good Samaritan. The only thing that mattered was whether they were in a hurry. Of those who were told they were late, only 10% stopped. Of those told they had time to spare, 63% stopped. A simple phrase, "Oh, you're late," was powerful enough to turn a compassionate person into an indifferent one. That is the power of context. And context isn't just about our physical environment, it's also about our social environment. Specifically, the size of the groups we are in. The British anthropologist Robin Dunbar discovered that there's a limit to the number of people we can maintain stable social relationships with. By studying the size of the neocortex in primates, he came up with an equation that predicted the maximum group size for any species. For humans, that number is about 150. Dunbar calls this the rule of 150. It's the number of people you would not feel embarrassed about joining for a drink if you bumped into them in a bar. It's the size of hunter-gatherer villages, of military companies, of communities that can function effectively through informal, personal loyalties. One company that has built its entire philosophy around this rule is Gore Associates, the makers of Gore-Tex. It's a huge billion-dollar company, but it operates like a collection of small startups. Whenever a plant or a division gets close to 150 people, they split it in two. They've found that in groups smaller than 150, peer pressure and personal relationships are far more effective at maintaining order and encouraging innovation than a formal management structure. Everyone knows everyone, and that creates a powerful sense of community and shared purpose. The rule of 150 tells us that if we want to start an epidemic, if we want an idea to spread and stick within a group, we have to keep our groups small. The book clubs that helped the divine secrets of the Yaya sisterhood take off, the religious societies that John Wesley used to spread Methodism, they were all small, intimate groups where a new idea could be nurtured and amplified. So, let's put it all together. To create a tipping point, you need the law of the few, the right messengers. You need the stickiness factor, a message that is memorable and moves people to action. And you need the power of context, the right environment for that message to flourish. Gladwell shows us how these rules apply to everything, even something as complex and tragic as teenage smoking. Why do teens smoke? Not because they don't know the risks, they actually overestimate them. They smoke because of the law of the few. They are given permission by the cool kids, the rebellious, risk-taking salesmen of the adolescent world. Smoking isn't cool. Smokers are cool. The habit is contagious because the people who do it are compelling. And why does it stick? Not for everyone. Only about a third of teens who experiment with cigarettes go on to become regular smokers. Gladwell explains that there seems to be an addiction threshold. You can smoke up to about 5 cigarettes a day, the level of a chipper, and not get hooked. But once you cross that line, the habit becomes incredibly sticky. And that stickiness is often linked to other factors, like genetics and a surprising connection to depression. Many heavy smokers, it turns out, are unconsciously using nicotine to self-medicate. So, how do you fight it? Attacking contagion is hard. You can't easily stop cool kids from being cool, and adult propaganda often backfires. But what if you attack stickiness? What if you created a safer cigarette with nicotine levels below the addiction threshold? Teens could still experiment, as they always will, but the habit wouldn't stick. Or, what if you treated the underlying depression that makes nicotine so sticky for so many smokers? This is what the drug Zyban does, and it has been remarkably effective. This is the genius of the tipping point. It reframes our problems and reveals that the solutions are often not where we think they are. They are not in massive, comprehensive programs, but in small, focused, intelligent changes. Commentary. As we come to the end of our journey through the tipping point, I find myself circling back to that core, hopeful idea: the world is not as immovable as it seems. We often look at big problems, in our communities, in our own lives, and feel overwhelmed. We think that the only way to make a difference is with massive amounts of money, effort, and time. But what Malcolm Gladwell teaches us is that this isn't true. The world is a complex system, but it operates on a few simple, elegant rules. Change doesn't happen gradually. It happens in one dramatic moment, at the tipping point. And that tipping point can be reached with a surprisingly small push. The first profound lesson, for me, is the power of focus. We live in a world that tells us to do more, to reach more people, to scale up indiscriminately. Gladwell says the opposite. He tells us to focus our resources on a few key areas. If you want to start a word-of-mouth epidemic, don't shout your message to the world. Find your connectors, your mavens, and your salesmen. Give them the tools, the story, the passion, and let them do the work. The solution isn't to reach everyone, it's to reach the right people. The second lesson is that the world is often counterintuitive. We think that to make a message stick, we have to make it louder and more complex. But the creators of Blue's Clues made their show slower, simpler, and more literal, and it became stickier than anything before it. We think that to stop crime, we have to solve the deep, underlying problems of poverty and inequality. But the leaders of New York City discovered that scrubbing graffiti and arresting fare beaters could have an even more immediate and dramatic effect. This teaches us humility. It tells us that we have to test our intuitions, to experiment, to be willing to accept that the answers might come from the most unexpected places. And the final, and perhaps most important lesson is a deep and profound belief in the possibility of change. The power of context is a radical idea. It says that who we are is not set in stone. We are not just prisoners of our genes or our upbringing. We are powerfully influenced by our immediate surroundings, by the people we are with, and by the subtle cues of our environment. A clean subway can make us better citizens. A small group can make us more collaborative. A hurried schedule can make us less compassionate. This isn't a pessimistic view of human nature. It's an incredibly optimistic one. It means that change is possible. It means that we can become better versions of ourselves by changing the details of our world. We don't have to solve the big, intractable problems to make a difference. We can fix the broken windows. We can find the beauty salons. We can give people a map to the health clinic. So what can you do with this knowledge, right now? First, think about an idea or a project you care about. Who are the connectors, mavens, and salesmen in your life who could help you? Don't think about status or titles. Think about who people listen to, who they trust, who they are drawn to. Find those people and start a conversation. Second, look at the message you're trying to send. Is it sticky? Is it simple, memorable, and personal? Could you change one small thing about how you present it to make it more impactful? And finally, look at your own context. What are the broken windows in your environment? The little things that are sending the wrong message and holding you back? What small, tangible changes could you make to your surroundings that would make it easier for you, and those around you, to be the people you want to be? Because that is the ultimate promise of the tipping point. It's a reaffirmation that one intelligent, focused person can make a huge difference. The world may seem like an immovable, implacable place. But it is not. With the slightest push, in just the right place, it can be tipped. We've explored the core ideas of the tipping point by Malcolm Gladwell today, and I hope it sparked something in you. But a summary like this is really just a map. The real treasure is found when you take the journey yourself. The book is filled with so many more fascinating stories, deeper insights, and moments of discovery that we just couldn't cover. If anything we've talked about today has made you curious, if it's made you look at the world a little differently, then I truly encourage you to pick up a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning a new set of ideas, it's an experience that can fundamentally change how you see the connections and possibilities all around you. You can find a link to the book in the description below. Also, if you found this summary valuable, and you'd like to continue exploring the ideas in the world's most impactful books, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. It tells us we're on the right track, and it ensures you won't miss our next journey into another life-changing book. Let's keep learning and growing together.